The day my son was supposed to marry into money, he picked up a microphone and blew the whole thing to pieces in front of 200 horrified guests. I can still see their faces now, tiny O shapes of outrage and gossip, all those hats and fascinators tilting towards us like vultures. And the funniest thing, if you've got a dark sense of humor like I do, is that what he did the next day cost his would have been in-laws their family fortune. Before I get to that, though, you and I need to go back. Back to where they made their first mistake underestimating a widow in a 10-year-old hatchback. By the way, since you're already this far in, make yourself comfortable. Kettle on, feet up. And if you like stories where snobs get exactly what they've earned, you might as well stick around with me. 6 months before that glorious train wreck, I was just Margaret from down the road to most people. 62. NHS widow, small, semi-detached on the edge of town, doing the usual rounds church coffee morning on Tuesdays, helping with the jumble sale when they remembered to ask, dropping casseroles round to whoever had had a baby or a bereavement. If you'd seen me, you wouldn't have thought secretly dangerous. You'd have thought cardigan, sensible shoes, probably has a loyalty card for every supermarket within 5 miles. You'd have seen my little silver Honda sitting on the street and assumed I was counting every liter of petrol. And I let everyone think that I'd been a widow for 15 years. When Alan died, the life insurance looked like a lifeline and a gravestone at the same time. £200,000 and a sharp reminder that life doesn't care about your plans. While Tyler slogged through school and then uni, I worked, I learned, and quietly, obsessively, I invested. Index funds when nobody at church knew what that meant. Buy to let when the headlines were screaming about housing crashes. A little bit of commercial property when everyone said I was mad. The trick I found is simple. Keep your head down and your spreadsheets up. Tyler knew I was sensible with money. He didn't know how sensible. I never lied. I just didn't list the numbers. You understand the difference, don't you? When he first mentioned Jessica, it was in that casual, not at all casual way men use when they're already half in love. She's from Cheshire, he said, sliding a photo across my phone screen. Perfect hair. Perfect teeth. One of those beige and white Instagram lives where nobody ever seems to sweat. Her dad's in business. In business, how? I asked, because that can mean anything from selling stolen vapes out of a lockup to owning half the high street. Car dealerships, restaurants, bits of property. They've got this place in the countryside. You'll see. He's successful. He smiled, but there was something tight at the corners of his mouth I didn't like. That tiny little grimace people get when they're already measuring themselves and coming up short. You ever watched your own child shrink themselves to fit somebody else's world? If you have, the taste it leaves in your mouth. I met Jessica properly at his birthday dinner. A busy little restaurant in town, exposed brick, hanging bulbs, the sort of place that puts pea shoots on everything and calls it rustic. Tyler had booked a corner table. I'd put on my best navy dress and my grandmother's pearls, the ones everyone thinks are sentimental costume jewelry and almost no one recognizes as the real thing. Jessica arrived 10 minutes late, a cloud of expensive perfume and cold air, already holding her phone up for a selfie with the sign outside. Sorry, the light was so good by the doorway, she said, kissing Tyler on the cheek, then offering me her hand like I'd popped out of the kitchen. You must be Margaret. She spent the first 15 minutes arranging her plate, photographing her wine, tapping little hearts on her own Instagram post. I watched her scroll through comments about how cute she and Tyler looked together from girls with identical eyebrows. When she finally turned her attention to me, it was like a switch had flipped. Smile, tilt of the head, laser sharp. "So, Tyler says you're on your own now," she said, like she was talking about a lost dog. "That must be hard at your age." I took a sip of my water. "Some days are harder than others. I manage. And you've got your little house, haven't you?" He showed me pictures. "Very cozy. Do you feel secure? You know, financially," she speared a leaf of salad, eyes not leaving my face, like long-term care, that sort of thing. "It's just, with everything going up." Tyler shifted in his seat. "Jess, it's fine," I said. I smiled. I have a good, harmless smile. "I've made my arrangements. I won't be a burden to anyone." That should have been enough, shouldn't it? For most people, it would have been, but I watched her file it away. Small house. Widow. Pension-like data in a spreadsheet. "Of course," she said lightly. "Mum always says it's important for older relatives to be realistic. Contribute what they can, even if it's just emotional support." I felt my jaw tighten around the fork. Emotional support. I'd buried a husband, raised a son alone, worked double shifts through flu seasons that would have sent her crying to a spa. Emotional support. Tell me something. If someone spoke to you like that about your entire life, would you let it go? Or would you do what I did? File their words neatly in a little mental folder marked future evidence. The second time I saw her, she brought her mother. They popped round one Saturday afternoon when Tyler was helping his mate move house. I opened the door to Jessica in wide-legged trousers and a cream jumper that cost more than my monthly food shop. And behind her, Patricia Walsh, in a camel coat and pearls that were, I'm sorry to say, definitely fake. "Margaret," Patricia said, sweeping past me into the hall like she was doing me a kindness just by being there. "We were in the area and Jessica thought I simply had to see where you live." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. They walked through my little like surveyors from the council, touching surfaces, murmuring to each other. Jessica opened cupboard doors without asking, peered into my pantry, actually slid open the cutlery drawer and raised her eyebrows at the mismatched spoons. "Oh, Mum, it's so nostalgic," she said. "You know, like Nana's old place." Patricia stood in my living room, looking at the family photos, the slightly worn sofa, the carpet I'd had cleaned last month because I'd been half expecting exactly this performance. "It's very lived in," she said finally. "You've clearly made the most of what you've got. In your situation," I smiled, because if I didn't, I might have picked up the teapot and thrown it. "Tea." She settled herself in my best armchair, crossed her legs, and gave me the same smile I use on toddlers having tantrums. "We were just talking in the car," she said, accepting her cup, "about how important it is, when children marry, for everyone to understand their role, for older family members to contribute what they can, even if it's just emotional support." There it was again, that phrase, like she'd practiced it. "And sometimes," she went on, "it's actually a kindness for older people to think about streamlining, not having the burden of a whole house, gardens, repairs. There are some very nice retirement flats near us. Purpose-built, on-site warden." Jessica nodded, looking at my curtains. "Mum's right. It's just about being appropriate, isn't it?" I watched them, two women so certain they were looking down on me that it never occurred to them they might be the ones on a cliff edge. "Thank you for your concern," I said quietly. "I'll bear it in mind." You ever had someone walk around your home like they're assessing a charity case? If you have, tell me, what did you want to do in that moment? Smile and make more tea, or show them the door? A few weeks later, Jessica rang me. No preamble. Just bubbles of excitement fizzing down the line. "Margaret, we've set a date. June. It's all booked, the estate, the marquee, the band, everything. The estate, I repeated. Oh, I forget you haven't seen it properly. Mum and Dad's place in Cheshire. We'll have about 300, mostly their friends and business contacts. Obviously, we'll make room for your side too, though I know your expectations will be more modest. There was that word again, modest. Such a polite way of saying small and embarrassing. I see, I said. And Tyler, oh, he's over the moon, she said, in a tone that made me doubt it. Dad's already talking to him about a position at one of the dealerships. It's all working out beautifully. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know. We'll sort all the big stuff you don't need to worry about contributing at that level. Just enjoy the day. She never asked my maiden name, not once, which, funny enough, is the name on rather more property deeds and share certificates than her family's has seen in a long time. When I hung up, the house was very quiet. The clock in the kitchen ticked loudly. Outside, someone was dragging a wheelie bin down the road. I could have gone to make a cup of tea. I could have rung a friend and had a little moan about posh in-laws and wedding politics. Instead, I picked up my handbag, put on my coat, and walked down to the high street to see Robert Chin. Robert's been my accountant since before Alan died. His office is above a nail bar. 2 rooms and a kettle. Nothing grand. He's one of those men who always looks mildly surprised to be where he is. Spectacles halfway down his nose. Margaret, he said, standing up as I came in. You're early for your annual review. I know, I said, sitting down opposite his desk. Consider this a pre-wedding checkup. He smiled, opened the file with my name on it, clicked a few times on his computer. Numbers flickered across the screen. Neat little rows, tidy columns. 15 years of quiet decisions, of saying no to holidays and yes to reinvesting dividends, of letting people think I was scrimping when really I was building. Right, he said after a few minutes, turning the monitor so I could see. Based on current valuations, allowing for a conservative estimate on the commercial units, you're sitting at just over 3.8 million. I looked at the figure, £3, 800, 000. It might as well have been written in another language. Not because I didn't understand it, I understood exactly what it meant, but because I was at that point where a number stops being money and starts being pure potential. You've done remarkably well, Robert said. Textbook. Really. I wish half my clients had your patience. I sat back in the chair. Patricia's voice floated up in my mind. Limitations. Appropriate. Emotional support. Jessica. Rummaging through my drawers like she might find a spare diamond ring tucked between the teaspoons. Tell me something, I said, still looking at the screen. If you were me, would you be telling your future in-laws this figure? Robert gave a short laugh. If I were you, I'd be telling as few people as possible, and I'd be thinking very carefully about what I wanted to do with it. That, I said, is exactly what I intend to do. On the walk home, the sky was low and gray, that damp English cold that gets into your bones. I didn't feel it. Something in me had gone very still and very sharp. They thought they were managing a poor relation. A harmless widow in a tired little house, who would provide casseroles and child care and endless gratitude. What they didn't know, what they still don't know in that moment of the story, is that they just handed me the perfect opportunity. That was the day I stopped simply surviving and started planning their education. And if you think what I've told you so far is bad, wait until you hear what they felt entitled to say to my face when I walked into their estate for dinner. The first time I saw the Walsh estate properly, my little Honda looked like it had taken a wrong turn and wandered into a period drama. Gravel drive sweeping round in a perfect curve. House spread out in old stone and new glass. Manicured lawns stretching off into the kind of countryside estate agents describe as exclusive. My car crunched up the drive like an apology. You remember I told you they booked the estate for the wedding. This was it. Their turf, their rules, and, as they thought, their place to put me in mine. A footman would have been too obvious. So they had a young lad in a branded gilet open the door instead, all smiles and rehearsed politeness. Inside, everything was tuned to impress polished parquet floors. Tasteful art that screams very expensive without you being allowed to recognize a single name. That faint smell of beeswax and money. Patricia met me in the hall with a kiss that landed somewhere near my cheekbone. "Margaret, darling," she said, "you found us." As if I'd navigated by instinct rather than following the sat-nav for an hour and a half through Cheshire lanes. Jessica floated down the stairs in soft knitwear and bare ankles, as if drafty corridors were for other people. "We've put you in the snug," she said. "More intimate? We keep the formal dining room for bigger things." She said bigger things in the same tone you'd use for proper people. They sat me at a small table near a window, candles lit, wine poured. Tyler beside me, slightly stiff in a jacket that didn't quite look like him. Gordon at the head. Patricia and Jessica opposite. Through the glass, I could see the gardens. A sweep of green and a glimpse of the marquee where they planned to display us all like trophies in June. Gordon was one of those men who fills a room without standing up. Thick silver hair, watch the size of a saucer. Voice pitched just loud enough that you can't ignore it. "So, Margaret," he said, carving into his steak as if he'd hunted it personally. "I run a few car dealerships, some restaurants, bits and pieces. Keeps me busy." He chuckled. "You know what they say, money makes money." He looked at me in that way people do when they're about to explain compound interest, like they're teaching a grandchild to tie their shoes. I let him talk about margins and turnover and leveraging assets, about the restaurant in Alderley Edge that the footballers love, about how property always pays. If you're smart, he was waiting for me to gasp. I could tell. To admire. "Of course," he said, taking a sip of claret. "We don't expect Tyler's side to contribute equally to the wedding. We understand your limitations." That word, again, it landed like a pebble in my glass. Patricia nodded, dabbing delicately at her mouth with a napkin. "It's a big undertaking," she said. "The marquee, the catering, the band, the flowers. 300 guests. One simply has to commit at a certain level. Or not at all. We're happy to shoulder that." She said it like charity, like sponsoring a donkey. Tyler shifted in his chair. "Mum did say she wanted to help." Yes, Patricia said, with the patient air of someone humoring a child. "Emotional support is invaluable. And your presence, Margaret, is of course essential. We'd never want you to feel pressured about money." I sat very still. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, steady and cold. It would have been easy, right then, to snap, to tell them exactly what my limitations were and watch their eyes bulge. "Tell me honestly, would you have bitten your tongue, or would you have laid your bank statements out between the starter and the main and let them choke on the numbers?" Instead, I took a breath. "Well," I said, "I know how these things add up. I can't match all of this." I waved my hand lightly, as if their entire life was a table decoration, "but perhaps there's something I could take on. The rehearsal dinner, say. Or the flowers. Photography." Each suggestion was batted gently away like a fly. "Oh, no, we've already booked the most marvelous florist," Patricia said. "Very sought after. You wouldn't know her. She doesn't really advertise. The photographer we've chosen is quite a specialist. Jessica added. He's doing this whole editorial thing for us. It's a certain look. The rehearsal dinners at the club. Gordon put in, they have their own caterers. Package deal. You know how it is. I did know how it is. I knew exactly how it is when people want to control not just the event, but the narrative around it. I smiled. I see. Well, you must let me know if there's anything practical I can do. Patricia tilted her head, eyes soft with condescension. Honestly, Margaret, the best thing you can do is just enjoy it. Be there for Tyler. At our age, she dropped that in with surgical precision. Stress isn't worth it. As I always say, older family members contribute what they can. Even if it's just emotional support, Jessica chimed, her teeth flashing. They shared the smallest of glances, the kind of look people give each other over someone's head. Tyler squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel his embarrassment radiating off him. Hot and helpless. I squeezed back. Once. Firmly. I wanted him to feel something else in that touch. Not humiliation. Not apology. Promise. Dessert was an exercise in survival. They talked holidays, ski resorts, villas in Spain, a yacht. Someone had lent them for a week. Patricia told a story about a friend of hers who'd married beneath herself and how terribly it had ended. Tone dripping with moral lesson. Gordon turned to Tyler. We'll sort you out, son, he said, like a benevolent king. There's a position opening up at one of the dealerships. Sales manager. Commission-based, of course. But with your potential, sky's the limit. And later down the line, if things work out, we could look at some share options. A little part ownership. You stick with me. You'll do very nicely. Tyler gave a strained smile. That's very generous. Of course, Jessica said, we'd need to move closer to the site. The apartment we've been looking at is Times Beautiful, asterisk. Mum, you'll love it. Big windows, concierge, underground parking. We couldn't possibly stay where we are now, could we? Ty. She said where we are now, like in the bin. I watched the pieces click together, job with strings, housing with expectations. Sun slotted neatly into their infrastructure like a new appliance. Not a partner, a project. They saw me as small, but what they were really underestimating was how much clarity you get from being looked down on for long enough. When I left that night, the air outside was bitingly cold. I sat in my Honda for a moment, looking up at their big, beautifully lit windows, the silhouettes moving inside. A little stage, with everyone in their place. Limitations, I murmured. All right, at home. I didn't even take my coat off. I went straight to the dining table where my laptop lives, opened it up, and started typing Gordon Walsh Cheshire Companies into the search bar. Here's the thing about people like Gordon, they love their names on things. Companies, house, local business awards, puff pieces in regional papers. It didn't take long. 2 car dealerships trading under a group name. One had healthy turnover but thin profit margins. The other had taken a hit in the last couple of years. Red, creeping into the accounts. A restaurant group that looked glamorous on Instagram, but once you dug into the filings, was carrying more debt than it should have been. Charges registered against the family home, the estate itself, leveraged, house rich, cash, poor, very pretty, very precarious. I sat back, fingers steepled. Money makes money, he'd said. Yes, it does, but only if you're not bleeding it out through a dozen flashy holes. You ever had that moment where you realize the people sneering at you are standing on a rotten floorboard? It makes you want to test the weight of it, just a little. A few days later, Tyler came round. He hovered in the doorway like he was 12 again and had broken something. We need to talk, Mum, he said. We sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea, the same way we'd sat when I told him his father had died. Different grief, He told me about Gordon's offer in more detail, the commission structure, the projected earnings, the expectation that he and Jessica would be available for certain client events, the nudge about joining the golf club, the flat in the new development, which, surprise, was owned by a company connected to Gordon's network. It's a good opportunity, Tyler said, but he wasn't convincing either of us. I mean, it's more than I've got now. And Jess says, and what do you say? I asked. He stared at his hands. I don't know. I feel like I'm being slotted into their world, which is fine. It's her family. But I don't want to be the poor relation they're doing a favor. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. You are not a favor, I said, to anyone. He glanced up, eyes bright. I don't want you to feel left out, or less than. They can be, you've seen what they're like. Oh yes, I'd seen. Listen, I said slowly, if you took that job, would you be happy? He hesitated. It was only a second, but it was loud. That's your answer, I said. And as for the rest, I smiled. That harmless little smile they all liked so much. Let me worry about how they see me. After he left, I picked up the phone and called Robert again. Back so soon, he said. I could hear the smile in his voice. I've been thinking, I said. We talked about my overall position. If I wanted to free up some capital, how quickly could we move? There was a pause. How much are we talking about? $500,000, I said. Roughly. I want it liquid. Call it an investment in my son's future. He whistled quietly. We'd need to stagger a couple of sales to avoid triggering anything awkward. But yes, it's doable. You're sure? I looked out of the window at my tiny back garden, the washing line, the pots, the neighbor's cat, staring with that offended feline scrutiny. Yes, I said, I'm very sure. And Robert, this stays between us. Of course, he said, I'll start the process. When I hung up, there was no drum roll, no lightning bolt, just the quiet hum of the fridge and the click of the boiler. But something had shifted. I wasn't just going to protect Tyler from their contempt. I was going to build him something they could never offer, a future that didn't depend on their approval, their mood, or their so-called generosity. The next day, while the Walshes were no doubt discussing flower arrangements and canapé options, I was sitting in a solicitor's office, listening to a woman in a gray suit explain the cleanest way to structure a property investment company. Henderson Investment Properties, she said, typing it into her system. Director, Margaret Henderson. We can note your son as beneficiary and future managing partner. Sensible to separate family assets from personal. I watched the words appear on her screen and felt a very particular kind of satisfaction. Paper, ink, signatures, harmless things, on the surface. But get them right, and you can move the ground under someone's feet without ever raising your voice. By the time I stepped back out onto the street, the sky had cleared, pale winter sun on wet pavement, people hurrying past with shopping bags and coffees. No idea that a quiet widow had just opened a door that would eventually slam shut on a very grand family. £500,000 was on its way into position. A new company existed in the world with my name over the door and my son's future written into its bones. And the Walshes, they still thought my greatest contribution would be a tray of homemade sausage rolls and a tearful smile at the church. They had no idea what I was about to do with the foundations of their lovely, over-leveraged kingdom. Stay with me, this is where their education really starts. The first time I stood in that grim little shopping center on the edge of town, with its flickering strip lights and half-empty units, I knew I was looking at the Walsh family's biggest mistake. Not the center itself, obviously. The way they'd underestimated it, and me. You remember I told you their empire was more wobbly than it looked. This is where the cracks turned into fault lines. The place was pure 1,990 seconds brown tiles. A Greg's, a discount card shop, a charity shop, a vape place, and a lot of shuttered fronts. Rain streaked the skylight. Somewhere, a child was crying over a dropped sausage roll. I walked past a "to let," subject to redevelopment sign I'd seen in the local paper and into a small unit with a temporary boardroom set-up plastic table. Cheap coffee. A few men in high-vis jackets over shirts. Mrs. Henderson, one of them said, standing up. Andrew Lawson. Thanks for coming down. We shook hands. He had that harried look developers get when they're juggling contractors. The council and their own overdrafts. Quite the palace, I said, glancing around. He laughed. You should have seen it before we cleared out the pigeons. Right. He pulled out a site plan, smoothed it on the table. So, the council signed off the outline planning. We're turning this, he tapped the ugly gray block, into a medical complex. GP super practice, diagnostics, physio, pharmacy, the lot. We've got pre-let agreements lined up. It's all going to look very shiny when it's done. And you need cash. I said. He smiled wryly. We need committed partners. Quick, clean money. Banks are dragging their feet. And some of the existing small stakeholders are difficult. There's a chap with a 5% holding who keeps threatening to pull out unless we meet certain conditions. Name of this difficult chap, I asked. Though I already knew, he checked his notes. Gordon Walsh. Do you? Yes, I said. I've had the pleasure. Andrew raised an eyebrow. Well, we'd like to buy him out. Him and a couple of others consolidate. But he's sentimental about this place for some reason. Thinks it's his retirement bedrock. He wants to stay in unless we pay him over the odds. Which we won't. I looked down at the plan, at the projected figures scribbled in the margins. Purchase price, build cost, expected return when the leases kicked in. Even with conservative estimates, the numbers sang, and if, hypothetically, I said, someone like me were to come in with a clean $500,000, how much of this would you be willing to put in their name? Andrew's eyes sharpened. $500,000 gets you Walsh's stake and then some. We could assign his percentage into your new company. Buy out 2 of the smaller family holdings as well. You'd be sitting at just over 20% once everything completes. With our structure, that gives you substantial influence. If the valuations land where we expect, you're looking at triple your money inside a year, maybe less. At which point, I said mildly, anyone still clinging on to the fantasy that this is their little nest egg finds themselves. What was that phrase Gordon used? Ah, yes, left behind. Andrew gave a small, careful smile. Mrs. Henderson, I get the feeling you know exactly what you're doing. Do you want me to talk you through the risks? By all means, I said, but I'm not scared of a few pigeons. He outlined the usual construction overruns, delays with fit-out, a worst-case scenario where the return was slower, not smaller. I listened, asked the right questions, and watched his respect tick up each time he realized I wasn't the soft touch he'd expected from a widow with cash. When we were done, I stood in the middle of that sad little mall again, looking up at the stained ceiling. Sign us up, I said, but the shares go into Henderson Investment Properties. Not in my personal name. On the bus home, I left the car in town because I like to watch people. I sat among shoppers and teenagers and the usual mix of exhausted faces and thought about Gordon. He had no idea that while he'd been waving his fork and talking about money making money, someone else had been rearranging his future behind his back. Tell me. Hand on heart, if you found out your son's future father-in-law was building his retirement on something this shaky and sneering at you while he did it. Would you leave him to it, or would you quietly slide yourself into his position and see how he liked being helped for once? A week later, I was back in the solicitor's office with Sarah, going through paperwork. So, Henderson Investment Properties will acquire Mr. Walsh's interest via the development company, she said, pen tapping lightly on the contract. You'll also be taking over 2 smaller family holdings. Once completed, you'll hold 21%. That gives you a controlling voice when combined with the main developer. Can we put Tyler down as future managing partner yet? I asked. We can note him as beneficiary and successor director, she said. He won't have formal control until you sign it over, but the structure will be ready. Good, I said. This is meant to be his. Long term. Sarah hesitated. You do know, Mrs. Henderson, this is quite a bold move, especially given the personal connection. That's why it matters, I said. I'm not doing this to score points at a dinner party. I'm doing it so my son never has to beg Gordon Walsh for a commission check. She studied me for a second, then nodded and slid the contracts across the desk. Sign here, here, and here, she said, and then we'll let Company's House know there's a new Henderson in town. Pen to paper, my name on the line. Nothing dramatic, no fanfare, just ink. But with every stroke, another one of Gordon's safety nets quietly rewrote itself. By the time the rehearsal dinner rolled round, the money was committed, the paperwork registered, and Henderson Investment Properties owned more of Gordon's future than he did. He just didn't know it yet. The country club was everything you'd expect: dark wood, golf trophies, photographs of men in blazers shaking hands over dubious charity events. The function room was dressed in white and gold. A practice run for the main spectacular at the estate. Fairy lights, flowers, too much Prosecco. I wore my navy dress and my grandmother's pearls again, same as the night at the Walsh house. You'll notice I repeat outfits. It bothers people like Patricia in ways they can't articulate. In a small gift bag, tied with a bit of ribbon, I'd put a simple silver picture frame. Nothing flashy, not cheap, but not designer either. Something that wouldn't scream in that room. Because, as you've probably gathered by now, the real gift didn't fit in wrapping paper. It was sitting in my solicitor's safe and logged at Company's House. When I walked in, Jessica's smile hit me like camera flash. Margaret, she said, air kissing the air near my cheek. You look sweet. Sweet like a biscuit. Patricia clocked the gift bag. You shouldn't have, she said, in the tone of someone assuming I'd brought a scented candle from the supermarket. The seating plan told its own story. The Walshes clustered near the top table with their friends, business contacts, and golf partners. I was positioned halfway down, wedged between an elderly aunt and a man who sold tires. Just for tonight, Jessica said brightly. On the day itself, you'll be front row. Of course. Of course. After the main course chicken that somehow managed to be both dry and under-seasoned, Jessica stood up to make a little speech about joining families. She thanked her parents for making her dream wedding a reality. She thanked Tyler for agreeing to come along for the ride, which made a few people chuckle. And of course, she said, turning towards me with a practiced pout, Tyler's mum, Margaret, who's been so supportive in her own way. We know it's a lot coming into all this. She gestured vaguely at the room, the club, the life. You've been very brave. Brave, like I'd managed to get dressed by myself. When it was time to hand over my little gift, I walked up to them at the head of the table and placed the bag in Jessica's manicured hand. It's just something small, I said, for your new home, when you decide where that's going to be. She slid the frame out, took one look, and did that tight smile people do when they've opened the wrong present at Christmas. Oh, she said, That's cute. Patricia leaned over and frowned slightly, then recovered. Very you. Margaret, she said, very homely. I smiled back, thinking of signed contracts and medical complexes. You mentioned retirement flats before, I said lightly. Near you. Her eyes sparked. She'd been waiting to revisit that. Yes, there's a marvelous development, she said, all on one level. On-site staff. I've put my name down for a brochure for you. Once the wedding's out of the way, we can have a proper look. It would be such a weight off your mind, not having to worry about gardens and gutters at your age. Jessica nodded, already mentally redecorating my house in her head, I'm sure. And it would be more appropriate, wouldn't it, for when we have children, knowing they've got a grandmother who's stable, presentable, stable, presentable, good little mascot. You ever had someone try to tidy you away into a box they've labeled harmless for their own convenience? I'd love to know what you'd say to them. Because I promise you, every polite word Patricia dripped in my direction was becoming another brick in something I was building. I went home from that dinner with the taste of cheap wine and cheaper condescension in my mouth, and I made two decisions. First, the card I would put on the wedding gift table would contain a check for £5, 000. A perfectly reasonable, slightly generous. Mother of the groom, present for a woman of limited means. Exactly what they were expecting. Second, the folder with Henderson Investment Properties key documents would go in my car, not waved around, not brandished, just there, ready. If the day went off without any worse than the usual snobbery, I'd keep the reveal quiet, sit Tyler down afterwards, in my kitchen, and tell him over a pot of tea that he was now the future managing partner of something far more solid than a car dealership with delusions of grandeur. But if they crossed a line, well, then the education would become more public. On the morning of the wedding, the sky was a brilliant, deceptive blue. I stood in my bedroom, looking at myself in the mirror in my chosen dress, soft gray, knee length, not designer, but cut properly. The sort of thing that hangs better on a real body than half the couture Jessica had been parading on her Instagram. My grandmother's pearls at my throat. Sensible heels. A fascinator I'd borrowed from a friend. This, I said to my reflection, is what a mistake in a dress looks like, is it? I didn't know then that those exact words were waiting for me at the end of the aisle. I tucked the wedding card with the check into my handbag. The other envelope, a plain one holding a letter to Tyler, a summary of his role at Henderson Investment Properties. And a copy of the key share certificate went into a slim folder, which I placed carefully in the back of the Honda. Driving up to the Walsh estate that day felt different. The marquee was up now. Enormous, white, billowing softly in the breeze. Cars lined the drive, black saloons, glossy SUVs, the sort of vehicles people buy when they want strangers to know what's in their bank account. Inside, the house buzzed. Florists darted about with armfuls of peonies. Caterers rushed past with trays. A string quartet was tuning up somewhere. Patricia stood in the center of it all, a general directing troops. She gave me a once-over as I came in, eyes flicking from my shoes to my hat. Margaret, she said, well, that's tasteful. Tasteful, the polite cousin of cheap, upstairs. Jessica was being fussed over by 3 women with makeup brushes and hairspray. Tyler was in a side room with his best man, looking like he'd swallowed a stone. When he saw me, his shoulders dropped a fraction. Mum, he said, you look lovely. I straightened his tie, like I did when he was 12 and going to a school disco. How are you holding up? I asked quietly. He glanced around, then shrugged. It's a lot. All these people, Dad Walsh has been talking about which clients are here, like it's a networking event. I feel like a bit of a show pony. You're not a pony. I said, you're my son. Don't forget it. He gave a weak laugh. You'll be all right down there on your own. I squeezed his arm. I've survived worse rooms than this. And I had. I'd survived hospital waiting rooms and mortgage meetings and teenage tantrums. A marquee full of people who judged me on my hemline and postcode wasn't going to finish me off. When the time came, an usher led me to the front row of chairs in the marquee. White covers, white bows, petals scattered down the aisle. I sat, hands folded over my clutch bag, feeling 200 eyes ripple and settle. Behind me, I heard the rustle of Patricia's dress as she took her place. Her sister beside her, their perfume drifted over. Sharp and floral, the string quartet began to play. The murmur of the crowd dropped to a hush. Sunlight filtered through the fabric, soft and forgiving. I remember thinking, just for a second, that if everyone behaved themselves, this could still be salvaged into something kind. That we could walk out of that tent with new scars. Yes, but not open wounds. I didn't know that Patricia was leaning towards her sister just then, looking straight at the back of my head, ready to drop the sentence that would burn her whole carefully curated world to ash. And if you want to hear exactly what she said, and what Tyler did with it, you're going to want to stay with me. Asterisk. That's time's not a mother. That's a mistaken address. That's what Patricia said, clear as a bell, right behind my head. Just as the music swelled and everyone turned to watch her daughter float up the aisle. You wanted the exact words, there they are. She didn't even bother to lower her voice properly. It was that half-whisper people use when they want times to be overheard by the right audience. Her sister gave a little gasp and a giggle. And then Jessica, in her lace and veil, actually times clapped asterisk. You ever had your entire life dismissed in one sentence and 2 syllables of cheap laughter? If you have, you'll know that horrible, hot, cold feeling in your chest I got in that moment. I stared straight ahead. I didn't turn round. I felt my face go very still, like porcelain. And somewhere behind the shock there was a small, precise click the sound in my head of a switch being flipped from patience to action. What I didn't realize, for half a second, was that Tyler had heard it too. He was standing at the front with his best man, facing the aisle. When Jessica started her slow walk, all eyes went to her, but his flicked sideways, towards his mother, his fiancée, his future in-laws. I saw his shoulders stiffen. Then, slowly, he turned his head. Our eyes met, just for a heartbeat. His face looked wrong, too pale, mouth slightly open, like the air had gone thick around him. I knew, in that instant, he'd caught every word. Jessica glided up the aisle, all soft smiles and carefully curated tears, utterly oblivious. The registrar stood waiting brisk, official, a little clipboard of love and legality in her hands. Dearly beloved, she began. In that neutral ceremony voice, we are gathered here today to witness the marriage of... She didn't get any further, because Tyler suddenly took 3 steps away from her and towards the microphone stand. Tyler, Jessica hissed, confused, a hand reaching out for his sleeve. What are you? He gently shook her off. There was something in his eyes I'd seen only once before when he was 11, and a bully had pushed him too far in the playground. That same hard, flat light. He turned to face the crowd and cleared his throat. Sorry, he said, voice carrying through the marquee. Before we do this, I need to say something. A rustle went through the guests. Patricia shot to attention, eyes wide. Gordon frowned, already annoyed at the script change. I sat perfectly still on my little white chair in the front row, my handbag on my knees, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it through the fabric. Tyler, Patricia said sharply, half rising. Not now. He held up a hand. No, asterisk. Exactly times now. The registrar, poor woman, looked like she wanted the ground to open and swallow her. But she stepped back a pace, clutching her book, and let him speak. He gripped the microphone with both hands. His voice shook at first, then steadied. "When I was little," he said, "my mum worked nights at the hospital and still got up in the morning to make my packed lunch. She sold her jewelry to keep us in the house when Dad died. She never once said we were poor, even when I know now we were bloody close to it." He looked at me then, briefly, and I saw tears in his eyes. "She is the reason I'm standing here in a suit instead of in a mess. She is the reason I could go to uni. She is the reason I know what love looks like." The Marquis had gone absolutely silent. Even the quartet had stopped, bows suspended. And a few moments ago, he went on, "My future mother-in-law pointed at her and called her a mistake in a dress, and my fiancé laughed." The words fell into the quiet like stones into a lake. Ripples of shock, whispers, hands flying to mouths. Patricia flushed a blotchy red. "You must have misheard." "No, I didn't," he said, voice sharper now. "I heard you perfectly. You've been making digs at her situation and her limitations since the day you met her. I've ignored it because I was trying to keep the peace. That's on me. But I will not stand here and say vows in front of you all and pretend I didn't hear that." He turned to Jessica. She looked like she'd been slapped, mascara already trembling. "Jess," he said, quiet now, but the microphone carried it to every corner. "I loved you. I still do, in some way. But if you can stand there, on times today, times of all days, and laugh at the woman who kept me alive and upright, then I don't know you at all, and I can't marry you." You could feel the intake of breath, like the whole Marquis had sucked in the same mouthful of air. "What are you saying?" Jessica whispered, into the mic without meaning to. "I'm saying it's over," he said. "I'm calling off this wedding. I won't be part of a family that thinks my mother is something to be mocked, managed, or tidied away into a retirement flat. I'd rather walk out single than walk in chained to that. Now, if you were sitting in that chair next to me, tell me honestly, would you have stopped him, put a hand on his arm, told him to calm down, to sort it out later, or would you, like me, sit there frozen with a wild mix of horror, pride, and a tiny, savage satisfaction curling in your chest?" Jessica's face crumpled, not a pretty cry, either red, blotchy, furious. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You're embarrassing me." Gordon shot to his feet. For a second, I saw the man behind the charm, the temper, the entitlement. "You ungrateful little nobody," he barked, forgetting the microphone entirely as he stormed forward. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? The job, the flat, this wedding?" "Dad," Jessica sobbed. "No, he needs to hear this," Gordon said, jabbing a finger towards Tyler. "We took you in. We gave you opportunities. We were going to make something of you. And this is how you repay us. To protect times, her times." He stabbed the air in my direction without looking at me. Some NHS widow in a terrace. There it was, the quiet part loud. If the crowd had been shocked before, now they were practically crackling. People were looking at each other, at me, at Tyler, at the Walshes. You could see alliances shifting in real time. A couple of Gordon's business chums suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Tyler's jaw clenched. "You were never taking me in," he said. "You were slotting me into your machine. And I'm not an accessory for your daughter's Instagram." Jessica let out a wail that was mostly fury. "So that's it. You pick times her, times over me." He glanced at me again. My throat tightened. "She picked me first," he said. "Every time." And then he did something that finished it. He took off his buttonhole flower, the little white rose Jessica had fussed over in the photos, and laid it gently on the table in front of her. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm not sorry for this." He stepped down from the dais, walked past me, and paused just long enough to touch my shoulder. A light brush. But it said everything. "Come on, Mum," he murmured. I stood up on instinct. 200 eyes following us. The registrar was rooted to the spot. Poor thing. The quartet were exchanging glances, like, do we play something, or God save the king? We were halfway down the aisle when Patricia found her voice again. "You can't just walk away," she shrieked. "Tyler, if you go now, don't you? Times, dare times come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." Tyler stopped, turned. The whole tent held its breath. "I'm not the one who's lost anything," he said. "You've just lost the chance to have a decent, loyal son-in-law who would have given your grandchildren love and stability. All because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about a dress." He looked like a man seeing clearly for the first time. Now, I could have left it there. We could have walked out, got in my Honda, and driven home. That alone would have been a story, wouldn't it? But remember, I hadn't come to this day empty-handed. I still had a promise to keep. A wedding gift. "Tyler," I said quietly, touching his arm. "Give me 2 minutes." He frowned. "Mum." 2 minutes, I repeated. "Then we go." I turned back towards the front, walked past startled guests, nodded once to the registrar in apology, took the microphone from its stand with a steady hand. Now, times got their attention. "Right," I said, calm, conversational, "since we're all here. Dressed up, with nowhere to go. Perhaps I might say a few words as well." There was a little ripple of nervous laughter. British instinct filled the awkward with a chuckle. "First of all," I went on, "I'd like to thank the Walsh family for inviting me into their home these past months. It's been educational." Patricia made a strangled noise. "This is highly inappropriate. I know you're worried about propriety." "Patricia," I said, turning to her with the sweetest smile I own, "you've always been terribly concerned with what's appropriate for someone in my situation. So I thought, given everything that's just happened, it might help to clear up a few misunderstandings." A murmur ran through the room. You could feel them leaning in. If you're still with me listening to this, you'd have felt it too. That delicious wrongness before a truth bomb drops. "You see," I said, "I am, as Gordon so kindly pointed out, an NHS widow who lives in a modest house and drives a rather old Honda. That's all true. What is also true is that, over the last 15 years, I've taken my late husband's life insurance and built it into a portfolio worth just under £4 million. Dead silence. Even the waiting staff froze. So when I offered several times to contribute to parts of this wedding, I continued, and was told that you understood my limitations. It was enlightening. When I was advised to consider retirement flats because my own home must be such a burden at my age, it was informative. I let that sit. Patricia's face had gone from red to an odd grayish tone. Rather than argue, I said, I decided to put my limitations to work. I set up a company, Henderson Investment Properties. Some of you may have seen it mentioned. If you read the business pages, a couple of heads in the crowd nodded, almost guiltily. Over the past few months, that company has acquired several stakes in local commercial developments. Most notably, the holding that used to belong to Mr. Gordon Walsh in a certain rundown shopping center, which is currently being transformed into a shiny new medical complex. Every eye swiveled to Gordon. His mouth actually dropped open. "That's nonsense," he blurted. "You can't just..." I have the contracts in my car if you'd like to check the signatures, I said sweetly, along with documents showing that Henderson Investment Properties now holds a controlling interest in that development, and will, if projections are borne out, turn an initial 2.1 million into something in the region of 6 to 7 million over the next year and a half. People were staring at him now, at me, at him again. So, I finished. When Patricia and Jessica were discussing where to put me out of the way in my twilight years, and Gordon was kindly offering my son a commission-based role to make something of him, I was busy buying out the bedrock of their retirement plan. I turned to Tyler. His face was a picture shock. Yes, but also this dawning, stunned respect. And as for you, love, I said, softer now, into the mic, but really just to him. Your wedding gift is not a job in a car dealership. It's already waiting in my Honda. It's a company in which you are the future managing partner, owning more income-producing commercial real estate than this entire estate is currently sitting on in equity. A gasp went around the tent. One of Gordon's golf partners actually choked on his own breath. I didn't say anything sooner. I said, eyes back on the crowd, because I wanted to see who you all were when you thought I was nobody. You've shown me, and you've shown my son. That's worth more than any honeymoon. Gordon surged forward, fists clenched. You've tricked us, he snarled. You little. Careful, I said quietly, the microphone catching every syllable. You've called my son an ungrateful nobody and me a mistake in a dress in front of 200 witnesses. I'd think very carefully about your next adjective. He stopped, not because he respected me, but because he finally realized how many phones were now out, filming. Yes, they were. Of course they were. Even at a disaster like that, people can't resist. If you'd been there, would you have kept your phone in your pocket, or would you have wanted proof you'd actually seen this in real life? I set the microphone back on its stand. Tyler, I said, turning back to him, shall we go and look at your present? He gave a sort of half laugh, half sob. Yeah, he said, let's get out of here. We walked out together, mother and son, through rows of stunned guests and wilting flowers, out into the harsh, honest daylight. Behind us, the marquee was buzzing like a kicked beehive. Ahead of us, my Honda sat quietly in the gravel, with a slim folder on the back seat that would change the shape of both our lives. I opened the passenger door for him, and as I walked round to the driver's side, I saw Gordon coming out of the house at a near run, his tie askew, his face thunderous, heading straight for us. I remember thinking, very calmly times, right then, let's see what he does when he realizes just how much of his world has my name on it. Asterisk, Gordon came at us across that gravel like a man who'd just realized the floorboards under his feet weren't nailed down. Tie askew, face flushed, one hand already pointing, the other fisting and unfisting like he couldn't decide whether he wanted to throttle me or shake me. You know that look people get when entitlement meets reality for the first time. That was marching towards my Honda. I shut the passenger door on Tyler, slowly, deliberately, and turned to face him. My heart was hammering. But the oddest thing had happened inside me. The fear had burned off. All that was left was a clear, cold sort of calm. You think you're clever, don't you? He spat, stopping a few feet away, standing up there, embarrassing my family, lying about my investments. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Quite a good one. Yes, I said, and I didn't lie. You can't have bought my stake, he snapped. It's not possible. I'd know. Behind him, Patricia had appeared in the doorway of the house, clutching her clutch bag like a shield. Jessica hovered just behind, still in her dress, mascara streaked, looking half shattered, half furious. Oh, but you did know, I said. You just didn't read the paperwork. You should have. Gordon, that's what signatures are for. I opened the rear door of the Honda, reached in and pulled out the slim folder I'd brought for Tyler. I hadn't planned on this confrontation being the moment I used it, but life rarely sticks to the script, does it? Here, I said, flipping it open and holding up the first document. Share transfer agreement. Development company to Henderson Investment Properties. That squiggle at the bottom, that's your signature. Dated 2 months ago. Witnessed. You were very keen to get the cash. As I recall, for the first time, real uncertainty flickered across his face. That's not, I was assured. You were assured you were being bought out by a new investment vehicle. I said, you didn't ask whose. You just saw the figure and signed. You needed the liquidity. Remember, overexposed on the restaurant side. Mortgages biting. A little bit too much borrowed against this place. You ever watch someone do the maths on their own downfall in real time? It's not pretty. I'll warn you. But it is instructive. I turned the next page. A summary from Sarah, my solicitor. Initial capital contributed. I read 2.1 million across several holdings. Projected return on the medical complex alone, 6.8 million over 18 months, assuming current valuations. That's not counting the smaller retail units or the ancillary parking. Tyler was staring between us, wide-eyed. Mum, he said quietly, what is all this? I looked at him then. Properly, this was supposed to have been a gentler reveal. In my kitchen, with tea and biscuits. Not in a car park with his ex-fiancée sobbing on the steps behind us. But you play the hand you're dealt. This, I said, closing the folder and placing it in his hands, is the company I set up instead of buying your future in-laws flowers. It owns Gordon's old stake in that development, along with some others. It's called Henderson Investment Properties, and it's yours. He blinked. Mine? You're the future managing partner and beneficiary. I said, I'll stay on the paperwork for a bit while we bed everything in. But in practice, love, yes, it's yours. You'll have proper managers and lawyers and Robert to guide you, but you won't be anyone's project. You'll be the one people come to with proposals. Gordon let out a short, ugly laugh. You think you can run what I built? He sneered at Tyler. You're a nothing. A glorified office boy without my name behind you. Tyler's fingers tightened around the folder. He drew himself up, just an inch. But it changed his whole shape. Well, he said, slowly. Luckily, Mum's name seems to do just fine on a company's house filing. Patricia swept forward, her voice pitched into that brittle, hostess tone. Everyone needs to calm down, she said. We've all said things we regret. It's been a traumatic day. Tyler, darling, put that away. Your mother's obviously confused. Let's get you inside. Have a proper talk. See how we can... We times, I echoed. Patricia, the only conversations we're going to have from now on will be through solicitors or surveyors. Her eyes flashed. There's no need to be dramatic. We're all family. No, I said, we're not. Family don't call each other mistakes. They don't treat someone's mother like a problem to be managed. They don't dangle jobs over their heads and call it generosity. I took a breath, the anger settling into something steadier. Let me be crystal clear, I went on. There was no misunderstanding today. You didn't misspeak. You showed us exactly who you are. I've just made sure your finances reflect the same level of judgment. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even the birds seemed to have shut up to listen. Then Gordon stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're playing with fire. Margaret, he said, those developments aren't a sure thing. You think you're clever, but if there's a problem with the land, if planning shifts, if the council, then I'll handle it. I said, with proper advice. And if it all falls to pieces, at least it'll be on my terms. Not because I hitched my son to a man who thinks calling women mistakes is acceptable business etiquette. I slid the folder properly into Tyler's hands and shut the car door. "Come on," I said to him. "We're done here." We drove away with the estate growing smaller in the rearview mirror. In the side mirror, I caught one last glimpse of Patricia on the gravel, hand to her mouth. Jessica folded in on herself, and Gordon standing utterly still. The man who'd always believed he owned the room, finally realizing someone had walked off with the floor. Back at my little semi, I put the kettle on. Because of course I did. I might be rearranging empires, but I'm still British. Tyler sat at the table, the folder open in front of him, flicking through pages of share certificates and legal summaries. "This is real," he said, more to himself than to me. "This is actually real." "Yes," I said. "It's not the sort of thing one improvises." He looked up at me, eyes shining, bewildered and proud and a bit hurt all at once. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "About all of this. The investments, the money, the company. I could have helped." "You were busy becoming a person," I said gently. "I was busy making sure, when you were ready, you had something solid to stand on. I didn't want you making choices based on what you thought you owed me, or them." He swallowed. Was this revenge? There it was. The question you're probably thinking as well, isn't it? Go on. Be honest with yourself. I sat opposite him, hands wrapped around my mug. "No," I said, "not at first. At first it was protection. I saw the way they talked about you, about me, and I thought, right, I'm not letting my son disappear into that machine." Today, well, today had elements of theater. I'll admit that. But I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I simply let the truth show up to their performance and refused to leave quietly. He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Finally, I should have stood up to them sooner. I shouldn't have let them talk about you like that." "You did stand up," I said, "exactly when it mattered. The rest, we can tidy up together." On Monday morning, my phone started buzzing before I'd even got my dressing gown on. Local number, unknown. Mrs. Henderson, a woman's voice said, "This is Emma from the Times Courier **. We've had reports of some developments at a wedding over the weekend involving Henderson Investment Properties. I was wondering if you'd care to comment." I pictured the car park, the marquee, the phones raised and filming. Of course, it was already doing the rounds. Somewhere, a blurry video of Tyler calling off his wedding and me casually dismantling a man's retirement plan was being watched over burnt toast and office coffee. No comment on the family matters. I said, "As for the company, everything we're doing is on public record at Company's House. We believe in investing in solid, useful infrastructure for the community. If you'd like to talk about improved access to healthcare and jobs, I'm happy to schedule something. If you're after gossip, I'm not your girl." She laughed, a bit wrong-footed. "Right. Yes, I'll be in touch." There were other calls that day. A reporter from a business website, a man who'd been trying to get Gordon to expand into his industrial units and now wanted a meeting with me instead. Someone from the council's regeneration team, checking in on timelines. Every time I said "we" about Henderson Investment Properties, I watched Tyler's expression, saw him straighten a fraction more. That afternoon, we met with Sarah and one of the project's financial consultants. They took us through the valuations, the projected cash flows, the boring but beautiful spreadsheets. Henderson Investment Properties, they said, was already worth just over £4, $2 million on paper. With clear growth ahead, you'll want a proper registered office, the consultant said, separate from your home and a company car or two for site visits. It's all deductible. Tyler looked at me, wide-eyed, when they handed him the keys to a modest, sensible hybrid with the company's name on the insurance. Apparently, I said, smiling, you're not taking the bus to work anymore. Gordon rang that evening. Of course he did. Margaret, he said, going straight into that faux reasonable tone people use when they're desperate. I think we've both said things we didn't mean. Look, I've been looking at the plans. That site carries risk. Environmental assessments, possible traffic issues. You're exposed in ways you don't understand. If we sit down, work something out, I can take some of that risk back. We could go in together. In together, I repeated. Meaning, I put up the capital, you take a chunk of the return, and we both get the stress. He bristled. I'm offering you my expertise. I've seen your expertise. I said, it's plastered all over your accounts. I'll be fine. Thank you. I have my own advisors now, the ones who read all the paperwork. His voice hardened. You think this is a game? You've made an enemy here. No, I said, and this is the difference. Really, I haven't made anything. You did. With your choices. I just stepped out of the way of the consequences and picked up what you dropped. He started to bluster about lawyers, about challenging the share transfer, about misrepresentation. By all means. I said, speak to your solicitor. They'll confirm what you signed. And while you're at it, you might want to ring the club as well. The club, he snapped. Oh, didn't I mention, I said lightly. Henderson Investment Properties completed on the land under the golf club last week. Different structure. Long-term lease. I expect the terms of their next renewal might be interesting, particularly for whoever's organizing the charity luncheons. There was a beat of silence. You wouldn't, he said. I don't need to do anything, I replied. Markets move. Rents adjust. People learn that the woman they called a mistaken address can, in fact, read a balance sheet. I hung up before he could answer. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is take the phone away from a man before he digs any deeper. 3 months later, I stood at the edge of the construction site that used to be that sad little shopping center and watched my son chair a meeting. Hard hat, high-vis vest, clipboard in hand. Not a show pony, not anyone's +1, but a man people were listening to. So if we bring the fit-out forward on the diagnostics wing, he was saying, we can start generating revenue there while the rest catches up. Andrew, you said the council's keen on an early opening for the GP section. Andrew, the developer who'd once looked at me like a slightly surprising windfall, nodded. Yes, we can rephase. The Henderson position has given us enough flexibility on the contractor side. Projected valuation with the accelerated schedule is up about 30%. Tyler caught my eye across the muddy ground and grinned. Just for a second, my chest felt too full. Afterwards, as the contractors drifted away and the last digger fell quiet, we stood together, overlooking the skeleton of what would soon be consulting rooms and waiting areas and a pharmacy where a card shop used to be. You've done well, I said. Asterisk. We times have, Mum. He corrected gently. You started it. I'm just carrying it on. Good, I said. That's all I ever wanted. On the drive back, we passed a property board at the side of the road, a glossy photo of a familiar house, slightly retouched to hide the cracks, with big letters under it. Asterisk, asterisk, price reduced. Motivated sellers. The Walsh estate. Robert showed me the listing. Tyler said quietly, they've had to drop the guide twice. Dad Walsh has moved his office to some unit on a business park. Jess and Patricia are staying with her sister in a 3-bed in Sale. Apparently, the charity lunch has been downsized. He didn't sound gloating, just thoughtful. Do you feel bad for them? He asked. I thought about it. Really thought. I feel bad for the people who worked for them. I said, the staff, they underpaid. The suppliers they strung along. I feel bad for the kids at that club who've lost their youth worker because the Walshes didn't want to fund unprofitable programs. But for times, I shook my head. I feel bad about their choices, not their consequences. He glanced at me. You could have destroyed them completely. No, I said. I could have lied, sabotaged, spread rumors. That's destruction. All I did was move my money somewhere more productive and let their own behavior do the talking. They still have options. They're just not the ones they wanted. We were quiet for a bit. Can I ask you something? He said eventually. Why didn't you ever, meet someone else after Dad? I smiled, watching the road. Oh, there were men. I said, a divorced GP who thought I'd be thrilled to cook for his teenagers. A widower who wanted a nurse, not a partner. I realized quite early on I'd rather be alone than settle for someone who didn't value what I actually had to offer. I wasn't going to swap one set of limitations for another. He nodded slowly. Makes sense. I'm not against the idea, I added. I just won't do it to prove anything. And I certainly won't marry into a family that thinks I'm an accessory. He laughed, surprised. Fair point. I have thought about moving, though, I said, selling the house, buying a little cottage, somewhere with a bit of land, space for a separate annex, guest house, office, or, I gave him a sideways look, somewhere grandchildren could come and run riot without upsetting the neighbors in. He flushed, pleased and embarrassed. Bit early for that, he muttered. But, yeah, I like the idea of you somewhere that's times yours, asterisk. Not just the place you survived in. That's the plan. I said, build something softer this time, not just the numbers. Later that week, I drove past the Walsh estate alone. The for sale board creaked in the wind. The windows looked dull. The drive, once obsessively raked, was scattered with leaves. Somewhere inside, I imagined Patricia walking through those big rooms, hearing echoes where there used to be parties, wondering exactly when she lost control of the story. I didn't gloat. Not really. I just observed. They had wanted me small, quiet, grateful, a background extra in their grand production. What they got, instead, was a rival who never raised her voice and still took away the one thing they couldn't live without the illusion that they were untouchable. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching that price-reduced sign sway. Then I pulled away, heading towards a different village entirely, where an estate agent was waiting to show me a cottage with a low stone wall and a little outbuilding, just crying out to be turned into an office or a playroom. Because this story might have started with me as a mistake in address, but I can promise you something. Love the next person who looks at me and sees nothing but a harmless widow, has no idea how expensive that mistake is going to be.